My sister smiled at her rehearsal dinner and said, "Tell everyone your Navy nickname." She thought it would humiliate me in front of 30 strangers. She thought I'd blush, stammer, and shrink the way I always had. What she didn't expect was that one word, just one, would make a 74-year-old man in a pressed blazer set down his glass, go completely silent, and demand she apologize before a single other person at that table understood why. She was already laughing before I even answered. That's the part that still gets me. She'd started laughing before the word left my mouth. You don't laugh in advance unless you already know the punchline. Unless you wrote it yourself. Stick with me, because this one has layers, and the ending is not what you're expecting. The smile came first. My sister Bree raised her champagne glass, tilted her head, and aimed that expression directly at me, the one she'd been rehearsing since we were 7 years old in our childhood bedroom, perfecting it in the mirror the way other kids practiced cartwheels. She had it down to a science. Chin slightly lowered, eyes wide, corners of the mouth curling just enough to look innocent to anyone who wasn't me. "Go on," she said, sweet as syrup. "Tell everyone your Navy nickname." Every head at that long banquet table turned toward me. 30 faces. Her fiancé Trevor's cousins visiting from up north. His law partners in their expensive ties. Nadia, the maid of honor, biting the inside of her cheek like she was fighting off a laugh she already knew was coming. The event coordinator by the double doors, who went unnaturally still, the way people do when they sense a scene brewing but can't place why yet. And near the back of the room, I only clocked him later, once it actually mattered, an older gentleman with silver hair and a spine like a steel rod, mid-sip, frozen, studying me with an expression I couldn't read. Not yet. I looked at my sister. Radiant. Ivory gown, soft waves in her hair, bubbles catching the chandelier light in her glass. She'd poured months into this weekend, the venue, the menu tastings, the seating charts down to the inch, every single toast scripted in advance. Including, apparently, this one. "Come on," she pushed, voice climbing, playing to the crowd now. "Don't make this weird." And there it was. Classic Brie. Box someone into a corner, then act wounded when they don't smile about it. I folded my hands in my lap. Kept my spine straight. Kept my face doing absolutely nothing. "Riptide," I said. One word. That's all it took. Before I tell you what happened after that word left my mouth, you need to understand where Bree and I actually come from, because none of what follows makes sense without it. We grew up in a cramped house in a small Ohio town, in rooms too small to contain the fights our family somehow kept manufacturing. Our mother, Carol, worked as a legal assistant and had exactly one governing philosophy: keep the peace, no matter the cost. Above honesty. Above fairness. Above her own dignity most days. Our father walked out when I was 9 and Bree was 12. After that, pretending everything was fine became Mom's second job. Bree figured out the game early. She learned that a well-timed smile and a fast enough finger pointed at someone else could get her out of almost anything. She was magnetic, quick on her feet, effortlessly pretty, and people wanted to believe whatever she told them. Teachers. Boyfriends. Relatives who only saw us twice a year at holidays. Me? I was the difficult one. The kid who wouldn't just drop it. The one who insisted on naming things instead of letting them dissolve quietly into the family's preferred silence. By 17, there was a shorthand for it in our house: Monica's being difficult again. I joined the Navy at 19. Not because I was running from anything, I actually had a partial scholarship sitting on the table. I joined because I wanted to belong somewhere that only cared whether I could do the job. No performance required. No managing anyone's feelings. Just competence and truth, measured in real time. The Navy gave me exactly that. It also gave me my nickname. I was assigned to the flight deck crew aboard a carrier during my first deployment, the people who choreograph aircraft launches and recoveries, widely considered one of the most dangerous working environments on Earth outside of actual combat. There is zero room for hesitation up there. You learn to read a situation before it's finished unfolding. You learn to move before anyone tells you to. About 4 months in, my chief, a guy who'd been in for over a decade, started calling me Riptide. I asked him about it once, over breakfast. He didn't even look up from his food. "Riptide doesn't fight the current," he said between bites. "It is the current. You don't see it coming, and once it's there, you can't stop it." He shrugged. "That's you." The name stuck. Nobody on that ship treated it as a joke. It was a recognition, shorthand for something they'd all personally watched me earn. But Bree had only heard that word once, years earlier, at a family dinner when I made the mistake of mentioning it. She'd laughed then too. Said it sounded like a soap opera villain's alias. Said I was being dramatic about the military thing again. She never bothered to ask what it actually meant. She didn't want to know. And now, at her own rehearsal dinner, in front of her fiancé's entire extended family, she decided to turn that word into a punchline. What she had no way of knowing, what none of us knew, was that there was a man sitting quietly across that room for whom the word riptide carried a very specific, very personal weight from an entirely different generation. The laughter started the instant the word left my mouth. Bree led it, that bright performative cackle she reserved strictly for audiences, and the table rippled along behind her. Riptide, she repeated, delighted. Sounds like a rejected superhero name. More laughs. Someone down the table echoed it back like it was the funniest thing they'd heard all week. What was runner-up? Bree pressed, fully in her element now, riding the attention like a wave. Commander spreadsheet? The table ate it up. I sat perfectly still. Hands folded. Shoulders level. I turned to look at her. Why, I said quietly, is that always my job? She didn't answer. She never did, because answering honestly would mean admitting that just let it go had been her entire survival strategy for 3 decades, and that it had cost both of us more than either of us had ever said out loud. Bree kept going, spinning toward Trevor now, using him as a prop for her bit, leaning into his shoulder in exaggerated disbelief. Can you believe they actually called her that? The military is so. That's when I heard it. A glass, set down deliberately. Not an accident, the opposite of an accident. I looked across the room. The silver-haired man had lowered his water glass and placed both palms flat on the table. He was staring at my sister with an expression I can only describe as recognition, not of her, but of what she'd just unknowingly revealed about herself. I didn't know his name yet. I'd been introduced to roughly 40 members of Trevor's extended circle over the previous day, and the names had all blurred together. But I noticed his posture, rigid, upright, unmistakably military even well into his 70s. And I noticed his face had gone completely, utterly still. Not confused. Not offended. Recognized. He pushed his chair back. The scrape of it against the hardwood cut straight through the laughter, sharp as a blade through fabric. Every head in the room turned. He rose slowly. He wasn't a tall man anymore, age does that to people, but when he stood up, the whole room reorganized itself around him. Not because of his height. Because of something else entirely. Something people who've spent a lifetime in service carry in the way they hold their shoulders. He looked directly at my sister. Apologize, he said. The word dropped into total silence. Bree blinked, glass still raised, smiles still frozen in place, but no longer moving. What? Apologize, he repeated. Calm. Level. No crack in his voice, no theatrics, no visible anger at all. And that, I think, is what made it so unnerving. You can dismiss anger. You cannot dismiss calm like that. Bree forced a laugh. Uncle Frank, come on. It was a joke. Uncle Frank. Trevor's uncle. I filed that detail away. No, Frank said. It wasn't. Bree's eyes swept the table, the same reflex she'd been running her whole life, the one our mother trained into both of us without meaning to. Scan the room. Find the ally. Find the face that will laugh along and diffuse it. She scanned 30 faces. Nobody smiled back. Not Trevor, who was watching his uncle with something like dawning understanding. Not his parents, who had gone rigid in their chairs. Not the cousins who'd been cackling 2 minutes earlier. Not Nadia, who had suddenly developed a fierce interest in her salad. Bree was standing alone in the middle of the joke she'd built. I didn't mean anything by it, she said. Her voice had shrunk, a register I hadn't heard from her since childhood, from before she learned that volume could substitute for accountability. Frank's jaw tightened. That, he said, is what people say when they want the damage without owning it. Trevor shifted in his seat. He turned to Nadia, sitting 2 chairs down. Nadia, he said quietly. Did Bree plan this? Before tonight. Nadia went pale. The word plan sat there in the air, doing damage all on its own. Nadia, Trevor said again, softer this time. Please. Nadia looked at Bree. Bree's eyes locked onto hers across the table, and I watched an entire conversation pass between them in about 2 seconds. Don't you dare. I'm asking you as your best friend. As the woman whose bridesmaid dress you already paid for. Nadia looked down at her plate. Then she said it anyway. She said the Navy nickname bit would kill. The table didn't go quiet. It went cold. There's a difference. Quiet is absence. Cold is presence. 30 people simultaneously arriving at the same conclusion, and nobody wanting to be first to say it out loud. Bree's face cracked in stages, the way things break under pressure, never all at once. First the smile disappeared. Then her shoulders lost their ease. Then something behind her eyes flipped from performance to panic. Trevor stood up. Not dramatically, he didn't shove the chair back or knock anything over. He just rose the way you do when a decision has already been made and your body is simply catching up to confirm it. I need a minute, he said. You're walking out? Bree whispered. During our rehearsal dinner? He looked at her. Not angry, and I think that's what actually broke her, that there was no anger in it at all. Just something quiet and final. The look of a man reevaluating everything he thought he understood about the person he was about to marry. Because I don't want to say what I'm thinking in front of everyone, he said. Then he turned to me. Monica. I'm sorry. He followed Frank out of the room. The doors closed softly behind them. Bree stood at the head of the table, dress perfect, hair perfect, champagne glass still in her hand, though it had stopped being a prop and become just something she was holding because she didn't know what else to do with it. The room no longer belonged to her. I've thought about that moment a lot since. What it actually looks like when someone loses a room. It's not dramatic. It's subtraction, one by one, without anyone even moving. The audience simply stops being an audience. My mother had her hand over her mouth. I still don't know if she was horrified at Bree or horrified at herself for every single year of just let it go. Bree turned to me, and for the first time all night, maybe for the first time in years, honestly, her face was just her face. No performance layered underneath it. This is unbelievable, she said, voice small. I lifted my water glass, took a slow sip, set it back down. You knew I said no, I told her. I hadn't planned to speak, but the words were already there, and I was too tired to swallow them again. I told you last week when you asked about mentioning the Navy stuff in the toasts. I said no. I told you some of those words carry weight. I asked you to trust me on that. I kept my tone even, another gift from the flight deck. You did it anyway, I said, because the room was laughing with you. You laughed at the name. I remember the people it belongs to. Bree's mouth opened. Nothing came out. And into that silence, from the doorway, came Frank's voice. He'd walked back in quietly, and I have no idea how long he'd been standing there. What did they call you that for? He asked me. Not unkindly. Curious, the way people ask when they already suspect the answer. Flight deck operations, I said. Aircraft carrier. My chief said I moved like I could see trouble before it happened. Frank nodded slowly. Then he said something that shifted the temperature of the entire room a second time. There was a woman on our support ship, back in '78, he said. They called her Riptide too. Hospital corpsman, second class. Catherine Adler. He paused. She pulled 2 men out of a flooding compartment during a systems failure off Okinawa. Nobody ordered her to. Nobody had time to. She just moved. He looked at Bree. We don't hand out names like that as jokes. The room said nothing at all. Bree sat back down. My phone buzzed at 11:42 that night. I was back in my hotel room, eating vending machine crackers because the dinner had ended 2 hours early and I'd never finished my meal. You embarrass me in front of Trevor's family. I read it twice, set the phone face down on the nightstand. It buzzed again. I hope you're happy. I stared at the ceiling. I thought about a woman named Catherine Adler, hospital corpsman, flooding compartment, Okinawa, 1978. I thought about the exact weight in Frank's voice when he said her name, the particular gravity of speaking about someone who saved a life, whose story you've carried for 40+ years. I thought about my chief and his breakfast, telling me I was the current itself. I thought about every single time in my life I'd let something pass without saying a word. I turned the phone face down again and went to sleep. The knock came at 7:14 the next morning. I know the exact time because I hadn't slept past 6, running the math in my head, what I would tolerate, what I wouldn't, and where exactly my line sat, now that I'd finally decided I was allowed to have one. I opened the door. Bree stood there in her bridal robe, half her makeup done, mascara on one eye, foundation stopping abruptly at her jaw. She looked like she'd started getting ready, and then stalled out when something more urgent demanded her attention. I'm sorry if you felt mocked, she said. I looked at her for a long moment. That's not an apology, I said. That's a press release. Her jaw tightened. I'm trying. An apology for what you actually did sounds like this. I plan to humiliate you in front of Trevor's family. You told me not to, and I did it anyway because I thought I'd get away with it. That's what happened. That's the thing you'd be apologizing for. It was one joke. You told Nadia it would kill. I kept my voice flat. You workshopped it. She didn't deny it. And the fact that she didn't deny it told me everything. It's my wedding day, she said, and her tone softened, reaching for something older, some baseline sister contract she assumed was still in effect. I know, I said. And I genuinely want to be there. But if you want me standing next to you today, you apologize in front of Trevor, in front of Frank, in front of Mom for what actually happened. Bree went rigid. Absolutely not. Then I won't be your bridesmaid. The silence stretched. I watched her face cycle through disbelief, anger, the start of a counter-argument, and finally something underneath all of it that might have been real hurt. I'd spent 30 years learning every version of my sister's face. This one was new. It looked like someone who'd run the numbers and didn't like the total. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced down and I watched the color drain out of her. "It's Trevor," she whispered. "What does he say?" She read it twice, once fast, once slow. When she looked up, every trace of the woman from the rehearsal dinner was gone. The smile that had owned that room. The certainty that everything would arrange itself around her if she just performed confidently enough. "He wants to meet before the ceremony," she said quietly. "Just you." She shook her head. "He wants Frank there too." I pieced together what happened in that meeting from 3 separate sources: Trevor, Frank, and eventually Bree herself, weeks later, in a conversation I'll get to. Trevor had spent most of that night talking with his uncle. Frank, a retired officer with over 2 decades of Navy service, had watched a name like that get stripped of its meaning in front of 30 people, and he'd sat with Trevor for 2 hours explaining, calmly, exactly what he'd witnessed in me the moment I said that word. Someone who'd learned to hold perfectly still while everything else was moving. Someone who'd been expected to laugh along and simply hadn't. He'd seen the question Bree never thought to ask, not "what's your nickname," but "what did you actually do to earn it?" Trevor, meanwhile, had spent the night wrestling with a different question. He'd always known about Bree's instinct to perform for a crowd. He'd chalked it up to charm. The edge she got when she had an audience was just enthusiasm, just excitement bubbling over. Now he was reconsidering whether plan to humiliate my sister, then blame her for the fallout still qualified as high spirits. When he texted her that morning, he asked her to breakfast. Just the 3 of them. Frank had a single question ready before she'd even sat down. "When Monica told you no last week," he said, "what did you think she meant?" Bree didn't answer right away. "I thought she was being oversensitive," she finally admitted. "About a name she earned," Frank said. "About a joke." Frank studied her for a long moment. "I've known a lot of people who use that word," he said. "Joke. It's remarkable how much it's expected to cover." Trevor told me later, carefully, without editorializing, that Bree started crying then. Real crying, not her strategic kind, deployed mid-argument for effect, but the kind that comes when someone who's been very certain for a very long time runs into something that won't move. Frank didn't comfort her. He let her sit in it. Then he said, "There's a version of this marriage that works. It just requires you to decide whether your husband gets a family you haven't rewritten, and whether your sister gets a life you haven't edited." Bree wiped her eyes. "What if I can't do that?" "Then you find out now," Frank said, "instead of in 5 years. I want to be upfront about this, because I know part of you came here hoping for a canceled wedding, a full-blown implosion, fireworks. That's not the story. The wedding happened." Bree walked down that aisle and she was stunning. Trevor was crying before she was even halfway there, the good kind of crying, the kind that makes everyone in the room realize this is actually real. I stood in my spot. Second bridesmaid. Small bouquet of white ranunculus. But before any of that, before hair and makeup and boutonnieres and the whole choreographed morning, Bree knocked on my door a second time. 7:48 a.m. I know, because I never went back to sleep. She was still in the robe. No more attempts at makeup. Her eyes were red. "Can I come in?" she asked. I stepped aside. She sat on the edge of the bed. I took the chair by the window. We sat in a silence that had been building for a long, long time. "I planned it," she finally said. "You were right. I thought it would be funny, and I thought you'd just laugh along, because that's what you always do. I knew you'd said no." She stopped. "I did it anyway because I thought if the room laughed hard enough, it couldn't be mean. I thought that made it okay." She looked down at her hands. "I've been doing that my whole life. Getting people to laugh so I never have to actually be accountable for anything." I thought about every version of this conversation we'd never had. "Monica, you're so sensitive." "Monica, she didn't mean it that way." Every corner I'd been backed into and then blamed for standing in. "I know," I said. "I'm sorry," she said. Not sorry you felt bad. I'm sorry for what I did. It was cruel and it was planned and I'm sorry." The room went quiet, just the sound of the courtyard fountain outside. "Okay," I said. "It doesn't fix everything. We've got years behind this. One conversation isn't going to undo it. But it's a start." She nodded. "Frank asked Trevor something this morning," she said. "He asked if Trevor thought I could actually change." What did he say? He said he thought I could if I wanted to. She looked up. He said the real question was whether I wanted to. I looked at my sister, actually looked at her, in a way you almost can't when you're still standing inside the old patterns between you. She looked exhausted. Younger than she had in years. More like herself than she'd been the night before in that white dress with the champagne glass, which sounds contradictory, but wasn't. Do you? I asked. Want to? She sat with that for a long time. I think so, she said finally. I think I got really good at being a version of myself I don't actually like. I have to tell you about Frank, because this story isn't complete without him. After the reception, after the first dance, the toasts, the cake, the whole long, beautiful afternoon, I found him out on the venue's back terrace with a glass of water, watching the sun do something spectacular over the hills. I sat beside him. We stayed quiet for a while, the kind of quiet that doesn't ask to be filled. Thank you, I said eventually. For last night. He waved it off, the small dismissive gesture older men do that somehow means both don't mention it and of course. What was her name? I asked. The woman you mentioned. Catherine Adler. Katie, he said, the faintest smile crossing his face. She'd hate Catherine. What happened to her? Retired in '89. Lives down in Florida now. 9 grandchildren and an ongoing feud with her homeowners association about her fence color. He glanced sideways at me. She's fine. She turned out fine. I sat with that. A hospital corpsman from 1978, a flooding compartment off Okinawa, and 40-plus years later, 9 grandchildren and a fence dispute. Did you keep in touch? I asked. Christmas cards, he said, looking back at the sunset. Some things you don't let go of. Not because they haunt you. Because they mattered. We sat a while longer. You moved like her, he said eventually. Last night, when everything went sideways. The way you just held still. He paused. That's not nothing. No, I said. It's not. He nodded, and we watched the sun finish going down. 6 weeks after the wedding, Bree called me on a Tuesday evening. An actual phone call. In our family, that was reserved for emergencies, or apparently, something like this. She told me she'd started seeing a therapist. Said the name deliberately, like she was trying to make herself accountable to it out loud. She said she'd spent her first 2 sessions mostly crying about our childhood, and that her therapist had told her the humor she'd weaponized her whole life had calcified into something closer to a weapon than a defense. That she'd spent so long teaching people to laugh with her that she'd forgotten how to earn their trust instead. She asked me when you stopped trusting me, Bree said. What did you say? I said I wasn't sure I ever started. A pause. She said that was the most honest thing I'd said in 2 sessions. I didn't say anything. I don't know how to do this, Bree said. The version where I actually tell you what's going on instead of turning it into a performance. I know, I said. Neither do I. We never learned how. Mom was useless on that front. Yeah. A long pause. Comfortable, though newer than our usual silences. Will you teach me? She asked. How to? She almost laughed. God, this sounds ridiculous, but how to hold still. The way you did that night. I thought about my chief and his breakfast. I thought about the flight deck, the wind, the noise, the controlled chaos that becomes routine through sheer repetition. I thought about a woman named Katie Adler, flooding compartment, Okinawa, 1978, who turned out just fine. Yeah, I said. I can do that. She didn't stop being my sister that day. She's still working on unlearning the version of herself she built just to survive. Frank sent me a Christmas card that December. Inside, just one line in careful handwriting. Some currents leave marks on the seafloor. That's not damage. That's evidence of force. It's on my refrigerator. That's exactly where it's staying.